Coming to you from Bridgewater, New Jersey. Hello, everybody. It is your DJ Crazy Tom. I'm not going to pull any histrionics on you, but now comes the regular edition of the Crazy Tom Show here on this Thursday, April the 18th. I separated with two podcasts, one regarding the major tragedies in Boston and, of course, in the town of West Texas with the explosion that happened on Wednesday night. But now I want to get to the regular stuff on my podcast, which I'd like to remind you is brought to you by your friends at the Crankiness Crusher. Check those happy thoughts out at crankinesscrusher.com or facebook.com/crankinesscrusher. It is also brought to you by Michelle's Crochet down in Louisiana, Epic Playground in Boulder, Colorado, the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and indeed by Liberated Syndication, which has housed the Crazy Tom Show since 2006. If you want to hear any of my shows, just visit my website at www.crazytom.libsyn.com. Once again, www.crazytom.libsyn.com. Or what you can do is go to iTunes and type in Crazy Tom Show in the search box. Once again, Crazy Tom Show. Just type those words in the search box on iTunes and you'll find me there too. So quickly, let's let the bovine excrement hit the ventilation shaft and start today's show with an update on a story that I did last week. And of course, we haven't really heard much, if anything, since. And I hate to break the news to you, but remember last week I talked about the missing College of New Jersey student. Well, there is still no sign of that College of New Jersey senior who has now been missing for more than a week. New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Division has joined the effort to find Paige Aiello, whom, remember, is a senior at the College of New Jersey. She's a captain of the ladies' tennis team, and all of a sudden she went missing. Paige Aiello was reported missing after a passerby called her parents to say she found Aiello's belongings on the south walkway of the George Washington Bridge back on April the 9th. Now, Paige's follow, Christopher Aiello, told a radio station, I think it was WCBS in New York, in fact, they're on their way to the GW Bridge area. Well, Paige Aiello's car keys, cell phone, and purse were found on the bridge walkway after she left her Hillsborough home last Tuesday afternoon. Authorities said Aiello took a train into Penn Station. Surveillance footage shows she eventually walked out onto 7th Avenue. Now, the dad says from that time, we have not been able to see whether there were any cameras or anything on the New York City streets. He added it's unclear whether Paige took a cab, subway, or walked to the bridge. No one reported seeing anyone jump from the bridge on the evening of April the 9th, and police are treating this now as a missing persons case since no suicide note has been found. And Mr. Aiello said there was no body and so forth. Well, Mr. Aiello said the emphasis shifted just in the past day or two from possible suicide. Paige Aiello's friends have hung pictures of her around town and have used social media to try and locate the 22-year-old, and the family has also hired a private investigator. Now, I have some very important information to share with you. If you have information on Paige Aiello's disappearance, what you need to do is call the Hillsborough Township Police Department. Their phone number, 908-369-4323. Again, the number, 908-369-4323. You can also call the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. Their number is 908-575-3300. Again, 908-575-3300. You can also call the Somerset County Crime Stopper tip line. It's a toll-free number, 888-577-TIPS. That's 888-577-8477. You can also go online to 888-577-TIPS.org or www.scpo.net and click on either Crime Stoppers or TIPS hotline. Keep in mind, all information and calls will be kept confidential. I'll give you the numbers once again if you have any information on Paige Aiello's disappearance. Please call the following: the Hillsborough, New Jersey Township Police Department, their number again, 908-369-4323. The Somerset County Prosecutor's Office, that number is 908-575-3300. or the Somerset County Crime Stoppers tip line, toll-free 888-577-TIPS. Again, 888-577-8477. You can also go online to 888-577-TIPS.org or www.scpo, that's Somerset County Prosecutor's Office.net, and click on either Crime Stoppers or TIPS hotline. That's scpo.net. So that's the latest on Paige Aiello's disappearance. Quickly, part one of my Crazy Tom High Five for this week. I'm going to go ahead and give some sports news right now. Of course, one of the biggest stories to happen this week is the passing of one of my all-time favorite announcers. And obviously it's not Harry Cowles because he passed 4 years ago, but a man that I always saw on television, especially in the 80s and the 90s and up into the early 2000s. His name, Pat Summerall. According to Keeping Score, where sports is always on the mind, there's a headline story called Remembering Pat Summerall, the authoritative voice of the NFL. This was written by Sean Gregory, and Pat Summerall passed away earlier this week at the age of 82, and I'll give you a couple of my favorite calls of him, me being a Dallas Cowboys fan, after I read this article. Here's how it was written, if I can get there, by Sean Gregory. He's the one that comes up with this blog. It seems impossible to call a broadcaster who worked Super Bowls, the 18th hole of the Masters, and the U.S. Open tennis tournament underrated. But Pat Summerall, who passed away on Tuesday at age 82, fit that bill. His longtime NFL broadcast partner, colorman John Madden, was the character. The bombastic ex-coach who boomed and bammed his way to endorsement stardom, culminating in an eponymous video game which has generated over billions of dollars in sales, though Summerall lent his voice to this wildly profitable enterprise. Summerall, a former NFL kicker, just delivered the play-by-play in his authoritative baritone son shtick. He didn't need an act. Ex-jocks like Summerall usually fill the analyst role, which in the broadcast biz, let's face it, is far easier than play-by-play. Watch the game, give us a little insight. The nuts and bolts of play-by-play, tracking the action in real time, is the true craft. And Summerall was the rare pro athlete who mastered it. Now, as I scroll my way down, as the iPod kind of went out on me, there's a compilation of Summerall's best moments. Now, to continue, his voice is alluring, not that the writer or many others of a certain age always loved hearing it. We were raised on Summerall and Madden calling the big game of the week for CBS. But there was nothing worse than hearing Summerall thanking the producers and directors at around 7 o'clock Eastern on a Sunday evening and imploring viewers to stay tuned. 60 Minutes, followed by Murder, She Wrote, would be coming up on these CBS stations. Summerall signaled the end of the weekend and another dreary week of school. So I don't salute you, Pat Summerall, for delivering such dread, but thanks for making football Sundays unforgettable. And he's absolutely right by that. Of course, I'll always remember two great calls that Pat Summerall made, and they were both for the Dallas Cowboys. I'll never forget the 1992 NFC Championship game played January 17th, 1993 at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. A game which the Dallas Cowboys led by a count of 24-20 in like the waning 4 minutes of the game. The 49ers had just scored a touchdown, and Troy Aikman was under center. He threw a slant pass to Alvin Harper, and he ran probably for about 70 yards inside the 49er 10-yard line. I think Emmitt Smith scored a touchdown right after that. The extra point was botched, and the Cowboys won by a count of 30-20. But I'll never forget Pat Summerall actually going into a little bit of a high-pitched voice and calling Alvin Harper's name on the slant. That was an unbelievable call, and even Pat Summerall got some enjoyment out of it. Now, Pat made a bunch of calls. I think, if I recall correctly, he called numerous Super Bowls. If I'm not mistaken, Super Bowl 18, where Marcus Allen had that touchdown run in the Raiders' rout over the Redskins. If I can think a little bit further back, CBS didn't have another Super Bowl until Super Bowl 24, when Pat Summerall called a rout of a 49ers 55-10 thrashing against the Denver Broncos. 1992 came along, and Summerall didn't really get another great Super Bowl. He got a 37-24 Redskins win over the Buffalo Bills in Minneapolis, a game that was 37-10 in the fourth quarter. I'm trying to think, when Fox finally got its first Super Bowl in 1997, that was Super Bowl 31, Pat Summerall and John Madden had a decent game, and it happened to be the game between the Packers and the New England Patriots, the game that featured Desmond Howard's kickoff return for a touchdown late in the third quarter, and that gave the Packers a 35-21 victory. So that wasn't really a great Super Bowl. But if we continue to stroll along, there, of course, was Super Bowl 33, which Pat and John called, and that was John Elway's final game, and that was a blowout with the Broncos winning 33-14 over the Atlanta Falcons. But really the best Super Bowl he called was the very last game he called, and that was the game where the New England Patriots won 20-17 over the St. Louis Rams to win Super Bowl 36. The game where Adam Vinatieri hit a 47-yard field goal as time expired to give the Patriots their first NFL championship. And they may have won an AFL championship before, but this was their first overall Super Bowl championship, one of three that they won in the 2000 decade. Well, I do need to mention this other call that Pat Summerall made after he and John Madden split up. I think it was the 2002 season, when Emmitt Smith became the all-time rushing leader in NFL history. And he did it at Texas Stadium. Pat Summerall was the broadcaster of that game. His color commentator, former teammate Daryl Johnston. And it was an emotional moment because Emmitt had finally reached the mountaintop and was the all-time number one rusher in NFL history. Now, unfortunately, when the Dallas Cowboys have unbelievable moments to celebrate, something always goes wrong. Well, if it weren't for Darren Woodson's horrendous 15-yard penalty on the ensuing drive by the Seahawks, the Cowboys might have won that game. But instead, Dave Campo and his crew found a way to screw up that day, and the Seahawks ended up winning that game, and that eventually led to Campo's firing. But nobody will ever forget Emmitt Smith becoming the all-time leading rusher in NFL history, and it was Pat Summerall who made that call, and we have to kind of remember that, considering Summerall is a Dallas native, and basically he's known so many people, especially been very close to Jerry Jones and many other members of the Cowboys organization. I'm sure he also has a bunch of New York Giants ties as well. Pat Summerall, he's certainly one that will forever be missed. I mean, we'll never forget many of his calls, especially hearing him on CBS and then later on Fox. Really was a fantastic person, a fantastic announcer, and one we may not see again, unless I learn from his craft a little bit. But Pat Summerall, he contributed so much to the NFL, and we can never forget him for the accomplishments that he did, especially for television and the way he described the game. So there you go, Pat Summerall. We remember him as part 2 of my Crazy Time High Five for this week. As I stated, I'm trying to leave as much histrionics as possible, but going on to part 3 of my Crazy Time High Five, I got a little bit of a special request, and I might as well send this quick sponsorship out, and that is Michelle's Crochet, who's out in Louisiana. Now, she does a lot of good stuff with beanies and blankets and other things. If you'd like to inquire about her services, you can email her michellescrochet@yahoo.com. I'll give it to you again, MICHELLESCROCHET@yahoo.com. That's the way to reach Michelle, Michelle's Crochet, and she actually had a request because she saw something online that she wanted me to talk about and share some opinions with. Well, believe it or not, there is a title from, I think there is an article from the Daily Mail out of the United Kingdom, which makes it very interesting. And the headline question is, why does the devil, in the miniseries The Bible, look almost exactly like President Obama. Now, this article was written a month ago and written by James Nye, again, of the Daily Mail. And I'm going to share this article with you and kind of share my opinions, because I did manage to see some of the pictures. I'm not 100% sure if there are really any facial relevance and stuff like that. However, I'll go ahead and read you the article and kind of share what people have been saying. The Sunday evening episodes of the History Channel's hit series The Bible threw up an awkward coincidence when viewers noticed that Satan bore a remarkable resemblance to, guess who? President Barack Obama. And I'm almost saying to myself, are you serious? Well, Twitter exploded into life during the airing of the latest edition of the Mark Burnett-produced series, with most noting the striking similarities between the 44th President of the United States and the Devil, played by actor Mehdi Ozani. Please forgive me if I can't pronounce that correctly. An interesting thing here, the show has been a surprise hit in the ratings, with the religious miniseries attracting 13.1 million viewers, and that was on a Wednesday, which topped television Leviathan American Idol's 12.8 million viewers, basically on the same day. Right-wing commentator and radio host Glenn Beck first pointed out the eerie similarity, and he tweeted, "Anyone else think the devil in the Bible on Sunday on the History Channel looks exactly like that guy?" While others were simply struck by the clear physical match. Twitter user Lee Christie tweeted, "Oh my word, watching the History Channel's The Bible. Does Satan look familiar to anyone else?" While Matthew Gaudette commented, "Watching the Bible series on the History Channel and noticed that guy playing the role of Satan looks strikingly similar to Obama." The unfortunate incident bears comparison with HBO's infamous inclusion of a fake George W. Bush head impaled onto a stick during the background of Season 1's Game of Thrones episode. Now, when the incident went viral, the network announced it was pulling the offending episode from its rotation, freezing shipments of DVD box sets and halting sales on iTunes until the embarrassing blunder had been fixed. HBO said in a statement, "We were deeply dismayed to see this and find it unacceptable, disrespectful, and in very bad taste." So we have something going on within party lines, don't we? "We made this clear to the executive producers of the series, who apologize immediately for this careless mistake. We condemn it in the strongest possible terms and have halted all future shipments of the DVDs, removed it from our digital platforms, and will edit the scene for all future airings on any distribution, domestic or international." My goodness, so we're going out and we are basically protecting George W. Bush at all costs, even though he did so many things to blunder up this country. There seems to be an agenda when it comes to media here. Well, HBO and the show's creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss apologized for the incident. While Mr. Benioff and Mr. Weiss, who noted the appearance in the series' DVD commentary, insist it wasn't a political statement. It was just a prop. But it remains to be seen whether this particular presidential mishap will create a similar backlash against the wildly popular miniseries. The Mark Burnett-produced program retells the stories from the scriptures in a scripted format, from Genesis through to Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. The miniseries' popularity is somewhat of a mystery. For one, the drama wasn't a hit with television critics, receiving a mediocre score of 44 on the Metacritic site. Now, a columnist in the Washington Times writes, as a cable series, the Bible lacked the ready-made, large-scale promotional platform and popular lead-in that can drive strong ratings for a new show on a major broadcast network, of the kind NBC was for many years. Well, indeed, Burnett told Entertainment Weekly that the series' success seemed almost preordained while it was being made. Now, Burnett said, the hand of God was on this. Now, this is according to an interview before the show's premiere. The edit came together perfectly. The actors came together perfectly. It just comes to life. Well, Mr. Burnett, who is most famous for creating reality shows such as Survivor and produced the Bible along with his actress wife, Romna Downey, described a number of weird things which drew the attention of cast and crew during filming. In one scene, filmed during a still night on the edge of the desert, Jesus tells the priest Nicodemus, the Holy Spirit is like the wind. According to Mr. Burnett, at that moment, a wind, like as if a 747 was taking off, blew his hair, almost blew the set over, and sustained for 20 seconds across the desert. Everyone just looked at everyone like, what just happened? Meanwhile, Glenn Beck tried to pour water on his comments, tweeting, media, relax. Actor has been in similar roles before. Funny, nothing more. For different reasons, the Bible is one of my favorite shows. Keep watching. From what I understand, the Bible is airing on the History Channel in 2-hour chunks on Sunday nights and has been the surprise winner in its time slot. I think the miniseries finale aired back on March 31st, which was Easter Sunday. Now, I have not had the opportunity to watch any of the episodes, but I will tell you this. There just seems to be a bias between the media versus a Republican and or Democratic president. They make all these apologies to George W. Bush, but have you noticed they haven't apologized to President Obama? I see party lines in where the media favors the Republicans because the Republicans are about big business, while the Democrats are like, hey, you're on your own. And in my mind, it's that bias that just drives me a little bit insane. And I just do not understand why people have to keep putting up with that. It shouldn't have to be. But unfortunately it is. And I can only wish that some way, somehow, that there can be some sort of equality and fairness. But of course, when there are connections, you don't solve those connections. You basically stick together, and considering that like all media conglomerates have gone from like 50 to a matter of like 4 or 5 in a matter of 30 years, it is kind of painfully obvious to me that there is a self-serving agenda that is going on. And there's a reason why television is airing it the way it is. You can apologize to George W. Bush, but you won't apologize to President Obama. I find it very striking. I don't know why this hasn't been made a real big deal. They made it a big deal in regards to Game of Thrones and HBO, but HBO's Time Warner. That might have something to do with it right there. But need I say that corporate bias is just one of those things that, you know, I could actually do a thing called What Drives Me Crazy, and I'll make it that segment, because when you have that bias, it to me just does not seem fair whatsoever. And I mean, if I'm trying to do a show relatively quickly, I figured I don't want to pump up the music as I would normally because of the situations going on now. But in any case, I just don't like the bias that's going on. And I'll tell you one thing. If it were Mitt Romney and there was a caricature of Mitt Romney and he was president, oh my goodness, I'll be bowing to him saying, oh, we're sorry, we're going to pull the episode, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You know something? That tells you how ridiculous freedom of viewership really is. I mean, freedom of artistry, freedom of everything. But unfortunately, you make an insult to one person who's Republican, and now all of a sudden, you have to pull things off the shelves, you have to make edits, you have to change this, you have to change that to their liking. You see how much money is involved when it comes to these things? Considering there's such the connection with Time Warner, which explains why CNN is owned by Turner and Time Warner. I mean, that right there drives me crazy. I'm not sure who owns the History Channel, probably Viacom or something. I'm not 100% sure, but my gosh. No wonder Democrats get treated differently than Republicans when it comes to something like this. The eerie similarity of President Obama and a character in the Bible. The mini-series that the History Channel shows, which is actually part 3 of my Crazy Tom High Five for this week. And all I have to say about that is, God help us. Alright, part 4 of my Crazy Tom High Five was something I was originally going to lead off with. Monday of this week was Income Tax Day, and you have to consider, given that things have been so crazy, especially in Boston, the town of West Texas, I've had to move so many different things around. So I'm going to briefly read an article that I believe was taken from the Examiner. I'm not 100% sure who wrote this, but this is a very interesting article. I'm going to share this with you. The title of this is 100 Years Old and Still Killing Us. America was much better off before the income tax. This actually was written on April the 14th. Here's how it goes. Did you know that the greatest period of economic growth in American history was during a time when there was absolutely no federal income tax? Between the end of the Civil War and 1913, there was an explosion of economic activity in the United States unlike anything ever seen before or since. Unfortunately, a federal income tax was instituted in 1913. And this year, it turned 100 years old. But there was no fanfare, was there? There was no celebration because the federal income tax is universally hated. Sadly, most Americans just assume that there is no other option to an income tax. Most Americans just assume that it has always been with us and that it will always be with us. This year, the American people will shell out approximately $4.22 trillion in state and federal income taxes. That amount is equivalent to approximately 29.4% of all income that Americans will bring in this year, and that does not even take into account the dozens of other taxes that Americans pay each year. At this point, the U.S. tax code is about 13 miles long. And those that are honest and pay their taxes every year are being absolutely shredded by this system. But wouldn't the federal government go broke if we didn't have a federal income tax? No. Actually, the truth is that the federal government did just fine before there was an income tax. In fact, the U.S. national debt has gotten more than 5,000 times larger since the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve were created by Congress back in 1913. The Federal Reserve System was actually designed to trap the United States in a debt spiral from which it could never possibly escape, and the federal income tax was needed to greatly expand the size of the federal government and to soak the American people of the funds necessary to service that debt. But it doesn't have to be this way. America was once much better off before the income tax and the Federal Reserve were created, and we could easily go to such a system again. What we desperately need to do is teach the American people a little history lesson. The truth is that the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history was between the Civil War and 1913, when there was no federal income tax at all. The following is listed from Wikipedia, and I'm going to go ahead and share this with you. The Gilded Age saw the greatest period of economic growth in American history. After the short-lived panic of 1873, the economy recovered with the advent of hard money policies and industrialization. From 1869 to 1879, the U.S. economy grew at a rate of 6.8% for real GDP and 4.5% for real GDP per capita, despite the panic of 1873. The economy repeated this period of growth in the 1880s, in which the wealth of the nation grew at an annual rate of 3.8%, while the GDP was also doubled. If you think about this, sadly, most Americans cannot even conceive of an economy like that. Most Americans cannot even imagine having a nation without a massively bloated federal government and without an unelected central bank centrally planning our financial system. But you know what? It worked. In fact, it worked fantastically well. The period between the Civil War and 1913 propelled the United States to greatness. Now, Wikipedia said a whole bunch of good things during those years, and let me go ahead and read these to you. The rapid economic development following the Civil War laid the groundwork for the modern U.S. industrial economy. By 1890, the United States leaped ahead of Britain for first place in manufacturing output. An explosion of new discoveries and inventions took place, a process called the Second Industrial Revolution. Railroads greatly expanded the mileage and built stronger tracks and bridges that handled heavier cars and locomotives, carrying far more goods and people at lower rates. Refrigeration railroad cars came into use. The telephone, phonograph, typewriter, and electric light were invented. By the dawn of the 20th century, cars had begun to replace horse-drawn carriages. Parallel to those achievements was the development of the nation's industrial infrastructure. Coal was found in abundance in the Appalachian Mountains from Pennsylvania south to Kentucky. Oil was discovered in western Pennsylvania. It was mainly used for lubricants and for kerosene for lamps. Large iron ore mines opened in the Lake Superior region of the upper Midwest. Steel mills thrived in places where these coal and iron ore could be brought together to produce steel. Large copper and silver mines opened, followed by lead mines and cement factories. In 1913, Henry Ford introduced the assembly line, a step in the process that became known as mass production. Now think about this. If we didn't have an income tax, how did we fund the government? Well, we mostly did it with tariffs and excise taxes. This is a recent article written by Thomas Edlam. Prior to ratification of the 16th Amendment in February 1913, which some people feel wasn't legally ratified, the federal government managed its few constitutional responsibilities without an income tax, except during the Civil War period. During peacetime, it did so largely, or even entirely, on import taxes called tariffs. Congress could afford to run the federal government on tariffs alone because federal responsibilities did not include welfare programs, agricultural subsidies, or social insurance programs like Social Security or Medicare. After the Civil War, tariff revenues sometimes suffered under a protectionist policy ushered in by the Republican Party that supplemented federal income via excises on alcohol, tobacco, and inheritances. But before the war, the need for tariff revenue to finance the federal government generally kept the tariff at reasonable levels. During wartime throughout early American history, the Founding Fathers were able to raise additional revenue employing a different method of direct taxation authorized by the U.S. Constitution prior to the 16th Amendment. These alternative taxing methods gave the young American nation embarrassing peacetime budget surpluses that several times came close to paying off the national debt. Well, why didn't we stick with that system? Well, early in the 20th century, the progressives and the social planners started to take control in Washington. And one of the things that progressives and social planners love is an income tax. In fact, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto is a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Of course, they promised us that income tax rates would always remain low. And at first, they were quite low. Now, here's an article written by Adam Young. The presidential election of 1912 was contested between three advocates of an income tax. The winner, Woodrow Wilson, after the ratification of the 16th Amendment, called a special session of Congress in April of 1913, which proceeded to pass an income tax of 1% on incomes above $3,000 and applied surcharges between 2 and 7% on income from $20,000 to $500,000. But once the progressives and the social planners get their feet in the door, they always want more. And we've seen how things have worked out. Today, the American people are taxed into oblivion. Now, in a previous article called "Show This to Anyone That Believes That Taxes Are Too Low," there are dozens of other taxes that the American people pay every year in addition to federal and state income taxes. Listen to the following, folks, and I believe, and I'm trying to see how many there are a remarkable 44 different taxes. I'll go ahead and read the first 10. Building permit taxes, capital gains taxes, cigarette taxes, court fines, which are indirect taxes, dog license taxes, driver's license fees, which is another form of taxation, federal unemployment taxes, fishing license taxes, food license taxes, gasoline taxes. We're up to number 10, and we're going in alphabetical order here. Here's number 11. Gift taxes, hunting license taxes, inheritance taxes, inventory taxes, IRS interest charges, which is a tax on top of a tax, IRS penalties, which is the same thing, tax on top of a tax, liquor taxes, luxury taxes, marriage license taxes, and Medicare taxes. That's number 20. 21 through 30. Medicare tax surcharge on high-earning Americans under Obamacare. Obamacare individual mandate excise tax. If you don't buy qualifying health insurance under Obamacare, you will have to pay an additional tax. Obamacare surtax on investment income, which is a new 3.8% surtax on investment income that goes into effect next year. Property taxes, recreational vehicle taxes, toll booth taxes, sales taxes, self-employment taxes, school taxes, septic permit taxes. That's number 30. Now 31 through 40. Service charge taxes, Social Security taxes, state unemployment taxes, or the SUTA, tanning tax, yes, a new Obamacare tax on tanning services, telephone federal excise taxes, telephone federal universal service fee taxes, telephone minimum usage surcharge taxes, telephone state and local taxes, tire taxes, tolls, which is another form of taxation, and now the last four, 41 through 44, traffic fines, which is indirect taxation, utility taxes, vehicle registration taxes, and finally, workers' compensation taxes. Yet, even with all these taxes, our local governments, our state governments, and our federal government are all absolutely drowning in debt. In another article entitled 24 Outrageous Facts About Taxes in the United States That Will Blow Your Mind, here's a number of reasons why our federal income tax system has been a complete and utter abomination that can never be fixed. Well, here are 19 of those facts. I'm going to go ahead and share those with you. Number 1, the U.S. tax code is now 3.8 million words long. If you took all of William Shakespeare's works and collected them together, the entire collection would be only about 900,000 words. Number 2, according to the National Taxpayers Union, U.S. taxpayers spend more than 7.6 billion hours complying with federal tax requirements. Imagine what our society would look like if all that time was spent on more economically profitable activities. Number 3, 75 years ago, the instructions for Form 1040 were 2 pages long.